Yeah, leave it open, I think. Great. Anyone got a space? Oh, you're all right there. Okay. That's it, we're done. Perfect. We're in. Great, lovely. Well, really, really warm welcome. I know some of you have been here since the start of our Parinirvana afternoon, and some of you have just arrived, so very warm welcome to all of you. We've got this very exciting Parinirvana weekend going on, which myself and Sangajit, I'm Subhana Jyoti, and Sangajit here, we're sort of I don't know what you call it, curating it or something over the weekend. And we're particularly delighted that Sanjit managed to persuade Maitreyabandhu to come and give us our keynote speech, address, whatever you want to call it, this evening. When I first came along to the London Buddhist Centre, Maitreyabandhu was teaching pretty much every week. And he doesn't do that anymore because he's off doing other things around the order internationally. So it's a particular benefit for us all when he can come and speak to us. And I know that so the theme of Parinirvana Day, the theme of the Parinirvana Festival, is death and impermanence, and how we can come into relationship with death and impermanence in a way that is life-enhancing for us and for everybody else around us. And I know that reflecting on death is something that Maitreyabandhu is, I would say it's one of his passions in a way, and I think it's one of the things that the very first sort of spiritual experiences that he had as a young boy was around his experience of death, and he's been reflecting on it very, very deeply ever since, and I think it's one of his many huge talents is his capacity to reflect very, very deeply and to keep returning and to keep reflecting. At the moment he's just back from a trip to India, which I feel like we'll probably be hearing the reflections of for a long time to come. And I'm fairly certain that they will feature in this evening's talk, but let's see. And so he's very passionate about reflecting deeply on the Dharma, and he's also passionate about supporting others to do the same. So I'm very much hoping that that's what we will be experiencing this evening, and I'm sure it is. And if you don't know him, all of that might make him sound like a bit worthy and a bit pious, but he's really not those things. He's very down to earth and very accessible and approachable, which is a wonderful combination for a keynote speaker. So let's put our hands together and give Maitreyabandhu a really well.
Thank you very much, Subhana Jyoti. That's very kind, thank you. Yeah, really nice to see you all on a Saturday evening. I didn't really believe that anyone would show up. But there is jazz afterwards, and Maitreyabandhu is here, waiting to do that. So there's jazz. If you don't like the talk, you can just sort of wait for the jazz, basically. So just to introduce my outfit. As Subhana Jyoti said, I've just come back from India and Nepal with a whole group of friends, and for the Order Convention, for the International Order Convention. And I will be talking about India for some time to come. It's had I think had a very, very a tremendous effect on me. Yeah, a really tremendous effect on me. And I was particularly moved to be on a convention with 800 or so, 700, 800 or so order members, especially many, many order members from India, our brothers and sisters in India. So I wanted to wear this shirt in case anyone from India is watching. I met a few Indian order members who told me they'd seen me on YouTube. My rather pathetic claim to fame. Anyway, I particularly valued my time with the Indian winning of our order, and I wanted to sort of mark that by wearing the blue shirt that Indian order members wear. You know? It's such a privilege to be in a, you know, I keep going on about it, but I come from this small town in Warwickshire, and part of the convention I was in a discussion group with a group of Indian order members. Most of them were Dharmacharanis who were considerably older than me, and none of them could speak English, and of course I can't speak Hindi or Marathi, but we could say our names, and it was just lovely to go around saying our names, and we all understood our names, and to feel part of a community that reaches from, you know, this little weird town in Henley Arden all the way to India. I just loved it, I can't tell you. Yeah. Okay, so I want to talk about obviously about the Buddhist Parinirvana, but I want to mainly focus on, as it were, the sort of central image of it. I don't feel it massively in the mood to explain things very much at the moment. I just sort of want to, what do I want to do? I want to sort of just evoke the Buddha's Parinirvana. You can see the figure on the shrine of the Buddha's Parinirvana. I come back to this image again and again. I was actually meditating on the image this morning and just finding it very, very moving. And those of you who are here for the ritual that we've just done, it was just very, very moving, wasn't it? Just hearing the names of people. So-and-so's uncle, so-and-so's sister, someone's daughter, someone's best friend. We're always among the dead, among the living and the dead. And one of the weird things about our culture is that we won't talk to the dead anymore. Human beings have talked to the dead pretty much all the way through time, and then we've decided we're too clever for that. It's a great shame, a really great shame. And it's very striking to me that so many people come to that ritual, that commemoration ritual, and how much it means to people. And it's just because it's a tiny chink into actually talking to the dead and reverencing and honouring the dead, rather than, I don't know what we do in our modern westernised world, but we've lost the art of speaking to the dead. And a culture that can't speak to the dead is a culture that's in trouble, I think, because, you know, you're always really indebted to the dead. I am, and all of us are, and we need to somehow not only look forward to those who come after us, we need to speak to those who have helped us and have brought us here, really. Yeah? But yes, of course, I want to talk about the Buddha's Parinirvana. You can't really call it a death because it's not a death in any way we can understand. So, and I don't understand what it is. I don't understand it, and guess what, nor do you. So that's fine, we're all in the same boat. But it's definitely not a death as we modern westernised people think of death, which is that, you know, at the end of when the physical body dies, consciousness is completely obliterated and there's nothing left. There's no memories, there's no values, there's nothing going forward. That's our modern westernised view of death, and that isn't a Buddhist view. Buddhism would think of that as a nihilistic view and even as an ugly kind of view. Does someone else want to get in? Is someone trying to get in? Do come in if you want to come in. There are always spaces if you're willing to be intimate. You don't need to if you don't want to. That's fine. So mostly I want to talk about the Buddha's Parinirvana, not in terms of trying to say what Parinirvana means, but just sort of by just reflecting on the actual image that I get from the Parinirvana Sutta, which is extraordinarily beautiful sutta, the Parinirvana Sutta. Perhaps one of the most beautiful suttas that follows the last days of the Buddha. And it's an image of the Buddha lying in the posture that you see him in the shrine, at least that's traditionally. And there's lots of, story before we get to this moment in the sutra, but I just want to focus on just the image of it, as it were, just the picture of him. So lying on his side, between two sol trees. The Buddha is always associated with trees. He was born under a tree, he gained enlightenment under a tree, and he moved into parinirvana between two trees. One of the many, many things I loved about being in India was worshipping a tree. You know, how good is that? You go to the Mahabodhi temple and you sit around a tree, and the bhikkhus heap flower petals at the base of the tree, and sitting around a tree, I can't tell you how valuable that is. You know, I really can't. But I probably will. I'll try to. So the Buddha, Parinirvana, he's lying there. You've got these twin sal trees, which, according to tradition, come into untimely blossom. They burst into blossom, and that blossom rain downs upon the Buddha as he enters Parinirvana, whatever that is, that greatest of mysteries. As if enlightenment wasn't a great enough mystery, the Parinirvana is, in my mind, in a certain sense, still greater mystery. And on that mystery are raining down these petals, beautiful petals from the sal trees. I always find that is striking, because if you remember, those of you who know the story of the Enlightenment, Mara's hordes, which are the forces of greed, hatred and delusion. Also, I think they also should be the forces of greed, hatred, delusion and apathy, because apathy is just as strong a force in history as greed, hatred and delusion. If you imagine all of those forces against enlightenment, and they're represented in the images of weapons, aren't they? You know, being thrown at the Buddha by Mara's armies, and they all turn into flower petals and fall at his feet at the enlightenment. But isn't it striking that at the Parinirvana there's nothing left to transform? The enlightenment has already happened. All you have is the flower petals. All you have is nature itself decorating the enlightened experience and this mystery of the Parinirvana. Yeah? There's nothing. Those forces of greed, hatred, delusion and apathy have already been transformed by the Buddha's experience. All you've got left is the falling sal tree blossoms. Yeah. So we need to imagine this figure, you know, he's in his 80s, lying down between two twin sal trees. And he's surrounded immediately by his disciples, his direct disciples. But you could sort of nuance that a bit and say, firstly, by his friends, by Ananda, who is his cousin, but you know, is a very, very close friend, really, is what we would say now. It doesn't sound like that in the sutras. And then Sariputra, Moggallana, all his principal disciples. But disciples always sounds a bit grand and a bit, highfalutin. He's really just surrounded by friends. But he's surrounded then by all the people that he taught directly. At least, Yanavacha was teasing me about my understanding of Buddhist history, because sometimes it feels like I'm making it up, but this is but luckily it's pre-history, so everyone was making up, so I'm just following in that tradition. But you know, the picture you see is of the Buddha surrounded by the Sangha, but surrounded by his disciples, those who have also gained enlightenment like he had, and those who are practicing like us all towards enlightenment. And traditionally, all of the local people came as well. So around the Sangha, or at least how I picture it, and Yanavacha might take issue with me afterwards, how I picture around the Sangha is humanity, basically. That is it. When you see paintings of it, there's very beautiful Chinese and Japanese paintings, very famous, often used picture. You get the sense of the Buddha being surrounded by humanity. Yeah? So there you've got a transcendental figure that's already gained enlightenment, being worshipped, as it were, by nature itself. And these are images that we need to sort of dwell upon for their mythic significance. There isn't a better way of putting it. It's not like I can come up with some clever sort of intelligent way of putting that. That matter of lying between two sal trees and having these flower petals raining down on the Buddha, that's about as good as an image as you can get. There's something about the silence of that image and the very, very quiet sound of these petals falling, which for me evokes something of the majesty and beauty of the occasion. Then you're surrounded by his friends and disciples, some of whom are weeping, some of whom aren't weeping traditionally because they understand the nature of impermanence. Although Bhante, my own teacher, Sangharakshita, the founder of our movement, he thought that that's probably just a later interpolation, that everyone would be deeply, deeply moved by the Parinirvana of the Buddha. So you have the Sangha, then you have, the local townspeople, the villagers, everyone that's come along. So I think of that as an image of humanity. And then traditionally you have all the gods and devas as well, and animals. And when you hear stories, and they're kind of fables of it, but fables are extraordinarily deep. They're much deeper than at times history, circle history. You've got all the animals come. One of the traditions, for instance, is the only animal that didn't cry is the cats, and it's given cats a bad name in Buddhism. But anyway, don't worry about that. I once told a group of school children, I can't remember, they were about 6 or something, and I was doing a talk, and I'm going to tell you a story, it's a true story, and I told this story of the Parinirvana, and I said, and there were all these animals came there, this hush descended, and I said, and guess which animal didn't cry? And someone said, was it the giraffe? No, I said the giraffe cried. Was it the crocodile? No, the crocodile cried. Was it no, I said it was the cat. The cat didn't cry. There was this fantastic pause. Then this little boy in big spectacles said, hang on, you said this is a true story. And I said, well, animals don't cry. No, they don't actually cry, but you said it was true. Yeah, no, I know, but it's kind of mythically clear. Never mind, it was like completely destroyed it. So we're in the language of myth. It's such a moment, because it's sort of, hang on, animals don't cry? He's making it up. So you got the animals and the animal whole kingdom, and in a way that's already imagined by the twin soul trees. In other words, nature is seen as something alive and participating in the drama, not something dead and an automaton, but an alive. The earth, nature itself, the animals are alive and participating in this transcendental drama. Yeah. And then traditionally all the gods and devas came to see the Buddha's Parinirvana. There's even a slightly comic moment, I don't know whether, I think it is meant to be comic, where there's a figure in front of the Buddha fanning him because he's obviously got some sort of fever, and the gods start complaining because they can't see him, they can't see the Buddha. And eventually the Buddha asks this man, I can't remember his name, to stand aside. And someone says, why is he asking him to stand aside? And someone realizes it's because the gods come, the Buddha's saying, look, the gods have come all this way to see me, and you're standing in the way. Yeah? It's slightly comical, isn't it? All the universe is supposed to be full of gods, and this guy is kindly fighting, but he's like, get out of the way, a very beautiful image in a sense. But according to tradition, you couldn't get the hair of a horse and prick it into the sky and not touch a deva or a god and stuff like that. So you've got this image of not only a living nature that's worshipping almost the Buddha, including the animal kingdom and so on. You've got the universe itself turning up, the universe itself turning towards this crucial event, this transcendental event. Yeah. So it seems to me that you've got these almost concentric circles which start to become a sort of a spiral as well. You've got the Buddha at the centre, who is the transcendental figure, beyond space and time, beyond language. His experience is beyond language, beyond words, beyond space and time. He's transcended the dichotomy between subject and object. He becomes the centre of the universe. Yeah, the Buddha is effectively the universe knowing itself and becoming conscious in enlightenment. Yeah, and that's at the centre of our universe. Yeah, and then around that is the Sangha, the friends and the Sangha that were taught by the Buddha. Around that is humanity. Around that is the natural world, and around that is the universe. Yeah. All of which is alive and, as it were, turned towards the Buddha. I think you could imagine even another sort of circle around that, which is how things really are. Yeah? That around the universe, as it were, is the great mystery of how things really are. And the whole of Buddhism is a journey or a discovery or an uncovery of how things really are. And the Buddha represents in himself how things really are made manifest. Yeah? So you've got this remarkable picture of a figure at the centre that but it is the nature of things. Then you've got that figure surrounded by friends and Sangha members, then humanity, then the natural world, then the universe, all of which is an expression of how things really are. So it's almost as if you've got around the universe is how things really are. I don't know whether this is making any sense. And it's also at the centre of things. Yeah. For me, it's one of the most beautiful images. It's not surprising that you see it so often in Japanese and Chinese painting. It's one of the most beautiful images that human beings have come up with. This transcendental figure who was seen through the dichotomy between self and world, you and me, time and space, and become, the fully enlightened Buddha, yeah? Who sees things as they really are, yeah? And that the whole universe, from the simplest thing of friends, his cousin, all the way to gods and devas, are all turned towards that great event. Yeah? So I want to sort of come back to that image at the end of the talk. But I want to mainly focus on, I will say more about that image. I have written some notes. I ought to perhaps open them. There aren't very many. Those are my notes. But I might glance at them occasionally. I wanted to just focus a little bit on humanity. And if we think of these as, are you following me, by the way? If we think of these as sort of circles of reality around the Buddha, I wanted to focus on humanity because that's where we are mostly, I'm afraid. We're humanity. Well, there's nothing afraid about that. We're those people around the Buddha. We're those people. And I wanted to just make this point that the Buddhist conception of what humanity was, who you and I are, is that we are reborn. Yeah? That human beings, the idea that this modern westernized idea, I say westernized because you can't really say the West anymore, because I mean westernized in the sense of modernized, urbanized, technologized, and so on. The westernized assumption that the consciousness is an epiphenomena of the brain, that when you die the brain is snuffed out, there's nothing left of you, is utterly alien to the Buddhist vision. Yeah, the Buddhist vision is again becoming, is the best way of putting it. Again becoming, that we traverse through lives. Yeah, that we haven't got this one life only, which is what we've all grown up with, as if that is a fact, that we have just got this one life only. We're all terribly pleased. I mean, the only value, I was interviewing Rupert Sheldrake recently, and he said the only value of our kind of secular, mechanistic, scientific view is we think we're cleverer than everybody else. Yeah? So we think we've got, in the past, people had this idea that people were reborn and people went through life, but that's all sort of silly superstition of the past. We're a bit cleverer than that. There's lots more to say about that, but I won't go on about it. But the Buddhist vision is that we traverse through lives. Yeah, that there is we often call it rebirth, but even that's slightly confusing. The correct translation really is again becoming. Because the trouble with rebirth is it sounds like you are a person now, and when you die you become another person. Buddhism is trying to say actually it's much more mysterious than that. You are a person now, but there's something much more mysterious about you now. Anyway, I don't want to get too into metaphysics, mainly because I'm not very good at them. And David Mitchell tells me off if I try and talk metaphysically, because he says, you're not very good at that. Stick to stories. He means it in a really nice way, folks. And he's right. But the Buddhist view, and I suppose I am genuinely very influenced by coming back from India and being particularly at the Maitreyabandhu temple, where for the first time in my life, even though I've been practicing Buddhism for many years, I was living in a world, even if it was just for a week, which the way I talk about it, you think I've been there at least for a number of years. Anyway, and probably was the first person to go to India. I talk about India like that, yeah, I've been like 5 times. Anyway, but it's the first time in my life I've been a practicing Buddhist in a Buddhist world, where I put on my kesa in the hotel and walked to the Maitreyabandhu temple with Tibetan monks walking, with Korean nuns, with Thai bhikkhus, all walking to the temple because that's just what you do. Nobody looked at the fact I was wearing a kesa. Even if I stand outside the LBC wearing my kesa, I get funny looks. And when I stand outside the LBC wearing my kesa, I feel self-conscious. Yeah? It was the first time in my life being in India where Buddhism is a public reality, not an eccentric private choice. And religion is not supposed to be an eccentric private choice. It's supposed to just be what you do. It's supposed to grow out of something much more intrinsic. It's not supposed to be, what should I do? Snowboarding, depth psychology or Buddhism. Or I could be an atheist, or I could go to the Catholic Church, or Islam seems interesting. That's a really weird modern thing. Yeah? And that, for me, it's the first time I've been in a Buddhist world where I can put my kesa on, walk 15 minutes to the Maitreyabandhu temple, circumambulate with my mala, and with no self-consciousness, because that's what everyone's doing. Yeah? I can't tell you the difference that makes. And that's what we're trying to create here at the London Buddhist Centre, and I'll come back to that at the end. We need to create a Buddhist world so that we can experience being a Buddhist and recontact a Buddhist vision, which is not that we live in an obliterated at death, but we're part of this great mythical journey that goes through lives, one life after another, in a way that I don't understand and that you don't understand, but that we are not obliterated at death, that our actions do matter. Buddhism seems to me to be saying that again and again, that your actions really matter. They matter for you now, they matter for you in the next moment of consciousness, and they matter after your death. They're not cancelled out then. They, in some mysterious way, create another birth. Yeah, it's like we're in such a habit of being a person in the world that even death doesn't stop that. But that is the Buddhist view, that again becoming, that this life is not bounded by the catastrophe of death. In fact, Buddhism thinks of death as an opportunity, not as a catastrophe. Yeah? Even a great opportunity. A lot of Buddhist practice is about being aware enough, developed enough, compassionate enough, open-hearted enough to make the best of the opportunity of your death. Yeah? It has a completely different vision of death. Yeah? So different that it's difficult for us to get our head around it, because many of us have made a kind of eccentric choice to be a Buddhist in a weird, secular, strange world that we've created. Yeah? And that's one of the reasons why we need to collectively create a Buddhist world, so that we can feel a Buddhist vision more directly and more intrinsically, less extrinsically. So I just thought I'd say a little bit about my own, what would you call it, my own kind of trying to think about rebirth and rebecoming. And I didn't want to talk about it in terms of theory, because I'm not very good at that. David Rich was smiling, so he's agreeing. I wanted to talk about it in terms of my own kind of experience. Yeah. So I've always been open to the idea, and there's no reason not to be open to the idea, because we haven't got any facts here. Nobody knows what happens when you die. I don't know, and you don't know. Nobody knows. We know what happens to the body, but we don't know what happens to consciousness. We don't even know what consciousness is, for heaven's sake. It's famously the hard problem of consciousness. You cannot work out from a scientific materialist point of view how consciousness arises. There's no idea. No one's ever seen a thought in someone's brain. You can see neurons transmitting and so on, but no one has ever seen a thought in someone's brain. And you cannot do that. Science will never do that. Yeah? So what we've got is a belief. So let's try and park that belief for a bit and imagine that instead our life is one incredible mythic journey through lives in which we're trying to learn lessons and we're trying to grow, and that our actions matter in that journey at every moment. Yeah. Anyway, so I've always been open to it, but I've never known whether I believe in it or not. And I think partly people trip up on the idea of, do you believe in rebirth or not? I think that's an unfortunate way of framing it. I don't know. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. I think belief or not is just an unfortunate sort of black and white way of framing it. Do you, rebirth, tick or cross? It's just not like that. You can't know it and you can't not know it. It's something you can be more or less open to. I think we need to start that process by being more critical of our Western materialist scientific viewpoint, at least seeing that it's a view and a belief, not a fact. We aren't in possession of the facts. We're not cleverer than the rest of humanity. We've just got our own particular modern view, which is very, very unusual. It's actually freakishly new, this idea that... actually, that's not quite true, but I like the rhetoric of it. One has to be terribly careful of rhetoric. So I thought I'd just talk about my parents' death, basically. So my father died about, 29 years ago now, I think. I love my father very much, and actually feel that when I think about my father, there's a father I remember, but there's also the father that I sort of feel in contact with now. I was in, we went to the Nagakot in Nepal, and we were looking at the Himalayas, and my father during the war was stationed in Burma, and he had this little, bit long story, but he was around at the base of Everest for various reasons, and there's a photograph of him on a horse, and so. And I felt this really strong sense of my father would love it here, 28 years dead, and that was when he was a very young man, long before I was born. So my relationship with my father isn't just to do with when he was alive. It's carried on, and in many ways got better since he died. He seems much more open to me than he used to. He's come to terms with who I sleep with, which hasn't been, took a few years of death. Anyway, but for me, it's a palpable sense of connection with my father. And anyway, I was on retreat. I must watch the time. How long? Anyway, I was on retreat, on a weekend retreat at the old Vajrasana, not the new one, but the old one. If anyone remembers that. On a weekend retreat when my father died, and I got, you're always waiting for that phone call, and I got the phone call. And I remember this really difficult journey getting back from Suffolk back to Henley and Arden in the Midlands, and I arrived there just too late. I was on the train. I had to change trains. I rang my brother from the train station, and he said he was in tears, but I've never heard my brother in tears before. And he said he's just died. I was on this, rainy platform in the middle of nowhere. And I don't know whether I bought a packet of cigarettes for a start-up. I don't smoke. You do sort of weird things. I was like weirdly kind of. It's very difficult to describe, isn't it? I just felt so sort of fractured. Anyway, I went back home. My father's body was still there. My family were there. The very touching moment with, the undertakers came to take the body away, and Ben, one of my nephews, we got him into another room whilst we did that, and then he came back and then said, "Where's Grandpa?" He just hadn't he just thought he was asleep. It was very, very touching to see the little boy just say, "Where's Grandpa gone?" He was here a minute ago, and now he's gone. I just, I was ordained by then. I'd been practicing for quite a while by then, and my mother. Eventually, the family went off, and my mother went to bed, and I just sat there. I can't have sat with my father, though. Interestingly, in my mind, I have. So it's funny what memory does. Memory is also very like myth, isn't it? In my mind, I was sitting with my father, but anyway. And I had this really strong sense that I didn't know what happened. I just didn't know. Now, that sounds very simple, but it was extraordinarily pure. I just didn't know at all, including I didn't know whether he had died in our westernized sense. I mean, I knew his body was dead. It's a weird experience because all I knew is that I wouldn't be able to talk to him anymore. I wouldn't be able to say, hello, Dad. You know that thing when you say, hi, Dad, and I don't know, I can't even impersonate it now, it's so long ago, but a particular way you say your father's name, I knew I wouldn't be able to talk to him anymore. I would go, he used to be in the shed a lot, and I used to just go up to the shed and chat to him. The only thing I knew is I wouldn't literally be able to talk to him anymore, but I didn't know what happened, and it was like a kind of pure experience of not knowing. It felt to me like a feeling blessed. I just didn't know what had happened. It was completely mysterious, but it was palpably mysterious. It wasn't a cognitive thing. I wasn't thinking, could he have this happened, could have that? It wasn't anything like that. I just sat there completely knowing I didn't know. And that included, I didn't know if he was reborn. I didn't know that. I didn't think, oh yeah, he's going. I didn't know that. I didn't know anything. Yeah. And it was a moment of great, as it were, purity. Oh, the best word is purity. I was just sitting in the mystery of our life for a bit, and not knowing what it is, and not knowing what death is, and not knowing what life is, and who I am, and not knowing. And it was wonderful, to have a moment of just putting aside all these silly opinions, these views, these ideas, these stories, these narratives, these how do I feel, what's happened, is that good, is that bad, all of that, all this just chatter, to put all aside all that and have this time, I don't know how long time, of just not knowing anything, but it felt pure, like being blessed. I wish I could be in contact with that more in my life, just not knowing. I think there's lots to learn just from that. If we could just not know more, rather than know so much and so on. Anyway, that was a long time ago. And then my mother died 2 years ago, just over 2 years ago. And I was around more for that. My mother, bless her, it was very, very painful seeing my mother. My mother, when I was young, was a terrifying woman. If she said I don't feel well enough to go to school, my mother would just say, I think you'll be fine. And there was no way of saying, she even when she was an old woman and she told off the grandchildren, I'd feel terrified for a moment. She said, okay, everybody, be quiet. And look, hang on, I'm 60. Never underestimate an old woman. Is my advice. Tough as old boots, my mother. It's really sad to see her. Cancer is so mean. It's just so mean. And I was around. I went and stayed in the house, and my brothers came and went, and my sister came and went. A very sort of strange time because mostly my mother was sleeping, and then she started having all these. They call them. I can't remember what they call them. Sangaji will know, but it doesn't matter. She started having all these visions, basically. My parents ran a coach firm and a taxi firm, and they were always very poor. We never had any money when we were young, and she was worrying. She'd say, I haven't got the coach keys. We haven't got the passenger list. And then at one point she was trying to revert. She used to drive coaches, my mother. She's a tiny woman. She didn't drive. She was the first lady coach driver in Warwickshire. She's terrifying. She had arms like a wrestler when she was. She used to be able to drive coaches before power steering. Can you imagine? So to turn around in the Thai island, she'd have to stand up and pull the reel down like that. Anyway, so she'd had, at one point she was saying, I'm trying to back up the coach. You're in the way. And she was like kicking me to get the way. And I was trying to, and when you get that, you can't, sometimes you say, okay, let me just move and then you can reverse the coach. So sometimes you go along with it. Sometimes you say, Mom, you're not doing that. You're here. And sometimes, I don't know what you do, but again and again, all these kind of, she saw her parents coming to get her, she said, oh, they're coming to get me. Her parents had died years and years and years and years before. Saw her parents coming to get her, and one time she said, oh, I'll miss you. And then she said, where's the controls? The controls of what? They're very, very sad, And, one of the terrifying things about death, again, and you might have already seen this, is just how much the body is just eaten away, just when you thought she couldn't lose any more weight, she lost more weight. I had this sense that that's why we're terrified of witches. That's why we have this thing of witches, because she looked just like a witch. She was skin and bone by the end, and from her profile, she looked just like a witch. I wondered whether part of our archetypal fear of witches, it's an image of death, that somehow collectively we've seen that again and again. Our mothers, our sisters, our brothers, and so on, becoming like an image of a witch. It's frightening. It's very sad to see. It was almost like death is so mean. You have to make you as small as possible before you die. It felt to me like there's a little tiny crawl space between this life and the next, and that you have to get as small as possible to be able to crawl through it. Almost like you crawl, you have to go through a tiny space to get in, and you have to go through a tiny space to get out. That's how it sort of felt. I had this really strong sense of my father's presence. So what I did is I'd move the photos so she could see him, and I had this really strong sense of my father's hands. My father had beautiful hands, big workman's hands, a bit like mine, but they actually worked. Mine just type. The occasional flat white. My father actually worked with his hands, so much bigger. And my mother was always nervous of boats, and she didn't like the skittishness in the water. And I remember my father, leaning over and getting my mother's hand and pulling her up onto the quay. And then them nearly embracing, which they never did. My parents never touched each other. I mean, they must have, because... and there's more than me. I could, anyway, let's draw a curtain across that. But as far as I was concerned, they never sort of touched each other. So I never saw them embrace. I mean, that's unheard of. The best I could do with my dad is shake his hand. I never hugged my father. He just didn't do that. It wasn't any less love, it's just he didn't do that. I imagine I saw my father sort of helping my mother out of the boat, and it was like he had come back to help her out of the boat of this life. It was all kind of, you could feel, it was all, she was quite distressed. It was all quite distressing, and she was distressed. And at one point my brothers were talking, I could sort of feel that she was getting distressed, and I thought, well, I was going to try to march my brother out of the room for a bit, and she was very, very distressed. And I could feel, it was like my father come down to help her out of this sort of, she's worried about this boat, and just help her back onto shore, very strong sense of his presence, coming to help. And I had this strange feeling at the time, because it all felt very familiar. It was a different house. My mother had sold the family house and moved into this tiny bungalow. But it all felt very familiar. We were close to Christmas. I was supposed to be going to New Zealand, but I did eventually. But I had to sort of delay my flight. it was coming to Christmas. It all felt really familiar. And my brother, at one point, everybody had come that day, and my brother was there with my sister, and my mother had this hot water bottle for her feet, and I went and filled up the hot water bottle because she got very cold feet, and put it for her feet, and like a minute later she died. Yeah. And as time was moving towards that moment, one of my brothers said, "I think she's waiting until the 27th." No, it wasn't the 27th. I can't remember the date now. Anyway, I think she's waiting for Wednesday. And that day was the 27th anniversary of my father's death. And so she died on the 27th anniversary of my father's death. Of course, that could be a coincidence, but it's quite a coincidence. It made me feel that perhaps time is like layered on itself, like wrapped, and that perhaps, I don't know, who knows about time, but perhaps a part of the past can lay on the future, I don't know. But anyway, she died on the anniversary of my father's death, to the day of my father's death. And it made sense of the weather, everything about it felt so familiar. It was because of my dad's death. Yeah. Even the fact that I was then due to go somewhere afterwards. I was supposed to be leading the winter retreat from here, the year of my dad's death. David Mitchell was very kind to me because I was going to lead it, and it was only a few days later, and he said, "Well, you mustn't do that, you need to have some time." And he was very thoughtful in helping me not lead the winter retreat and to step out of it. But what struck me for this talk at least, I've talked a lot about my mother, but my immediate response, I went into my sister. "Oh, I think she's gone." I tried for a pulse, but she just died, and I immediately said, "Okay, so you've gone through the difficult bit now. You've done the difficult bit. That was really unpleasant. Now you're all right. You can move. You can go now. You can move on now. Dad's here. You can just go on now." Yeah. And it's unusual for me. I'm very, very English, so I'm very repressed and quick to feel embarrassed and guilty and so on, and quick to apologise for it. It's very unusual for me to speak like that, especially with my brothers and sister aren't remotely like that. But my immediate, unpremeditated response was to say, "Okay, that was really horrible. Death is horrible. Let's not think it anything else. It is like a crawl space that's too small for you." But it really, my immediate, unpremeditated response was, "Okay, you've done that. You've done the bad bit now. That's really horrible. I'm sorry that had to happen. But look, you're through now. Now Dad's here. You just." He's pulling you out of this now. You're out of this now. You can now carry on now. Just go on. You're all right. Don't worry about us. We're fine. You go on now. You're all right. And I'd never heard myself speak like that, if you said to me. I was just saying, "You're all right. It's fine. It's okay now. It's okay now. It's been horrible, but you can forget that now. We're through. You're through." Yeah. And what struck me about that was that it was. I didn't think anything. Somehow my own practice of the Dharma, my understanding of the Dharma, whatever that means, because it's not a primarily cognitive matter, had somehow, my response was different. I didn't have this holy silence, this holy not knowing, which was profound enough as itself, and that I still think that. I see, my instinct was very naturally that, okay, now we move on. Now you move on. You're all right now. Dad will be there. Your mom and dad have already come down to get you. They'll be there waiting for you. What a relief that's over. You can now move on. Yeah. Now that's not a knowledge I have, of course, but luckily we're not talking philosophy or metaphysics. But that was my experience from practicing the Dharma for many years. So what I want to do mainly is evoke that as a possibility, that again becoming, that our lives are a mythic journey, starting we know not when, perhaps even that's why we have myth, because myth is a kind of cultural memory of lives. That's why myth still touches us so very deeply. Just this morning I was reading a poem by a poet I like very much, who had a terrible experience in the Second World War. And I don't know, it's like, you when you read something like that very deeply, it's like, I sort of know that. Who knows? I don't know. You don't know. I don't know. But that is my experience from practicing. But I want to say something a bit more than that, because there's more to it than this, I think. And that is that we tend to think again and again of ourselves. What happens to me when I die? What happens to consciousness when I die? And we're always thinking about ourselves. And I don't think that's good enough. Again, it's weirdly modern. Buddhism is always, I think, trying to help us to think about us, not me. To think about we, not me. So, throughout my own practice, I have started to feel more and more, I don't know what I feel, to be honest, but in that experience I seem to have faith in again becoming. And I had a very strong sense that my dad was there I don't know what that means metaphysically, I don't need to know. I'm sure that my mother did see her parents coming to get them, to get her, and they'd be really concerned for her. I do feel myself to be in contact with the dead, not in a spooky, silly, ghostly, sort of seancey kind of silly way, in a way that I can't really explain, and I don't fancy explaining it. But what's important, what I've come to think is most important, is that we need to be, well, the most important thing, of course, is to practice the Dharma. And in fact, the traditional way of saying it is practice the holy Dharma. The Dharma is not a philosophy, it's not some sort of interesting way of life, but a holy matter, a sacred matter. The main thing is for me, and I hope for you, is to practice the holy Dharma. And that means practicing it through lifetimes. If you look at the Jataka stories from the Buddha's life, you get all these wonderful little stories about, these animals that were born together, that something happens, and at the end of each story, the Buddha who's telling the story says, Ananda, you were that monkey, and, Sariputra, you were that chimpanzee, and I don't know what they say actually. Anyway, something like that. My knowledge of the Jatakas is limited, but the basic metaphor is that the Sangha around the Buddha were born together again and again and again, and that they'd been doing it together, not on their own. And that's, I think, exquisitely refined in the best sense. Again, I feel I've learned something about genuine refinement from in India, which we haven't got, which is a kind of religious sense, a sacred sense, which modern westernized people have decided they're too clever for. We think we're very refined. Actually, in many ways, in comparison with so many there were these incredible elderly Tibetan women prostrating around the Mahabodhi temple with, with looks of great love and devotion, and we think we're refined. It's like comical. It's painful. I found. They have this religious sense, this sacred sense, which I think we lost in the Reformation, never mind anything else. Perhaps pre-Reformation England might have had something of that. So we've hardly got even a cultural memory of it now. So I want to suggest that we need to be practicing the Holy Dharma, we need to be reborn together and keep on practicing together. Like, it's lovely having Sanghajit here. Sanghajit and I have been friends since he came along to learn to improve his cricket. Didn't quite work out like that, although you're still playing cricket, aren't you? Sanghajit is, I don't know whether you know Sanghajit, he's as good as gold. He's just the best thing ever. And he's been such a good friend to my friends and such a good friend to me. I hope we can just carry on after his death and my death, and everyone, I hope we can just, we won't, somehow carry on. That is the Buddhist vision, is that if you strongly enough relate to each other, and that is a big if, Bhante says if you don't do that, you're most likely to be reborn in your own family. So, you'd better start practicing. I'm not going back to Helion Arden, not now, not never. I'll be the only gay in the village again, I mean, for heaven's sake. But you can see what he means. In other words, you'll be attracted back, whatever that means, and we remember having a holiday from metaphysics. You'll be attracted back to what's impacted you most. And for most people, that's their family. For good or ill, actually, and still the people who have impacted you most. So you need to have a sangha of people where there's a strong enough connection that you'd get drawn back to that. That is the Buddhist vision, yeah, which we're all too clever about, but that is the Buddhist vision, and that's what I want to emphasize. So I want to finish with 3 things I think we need, and then I want to talk. Have I got time? And then talk about Bodh Gaya. What?
Depends how long you're going to talk about Bodh Gaya.
Yeah, that's a good question. Anyway, well, let's see. Look worried if I've forgotten what time I started. Numbers have always been famously bad for me. So I want to suggest that we need 3 things. And this is my main point. So if you haven't been listening so far, this is my main point. So first of all, we need, in our Dharma practice, we need to commit ourselves to Dharma practice. You need to, I need to, because it's a commitment to value. And that this human life, if it's about anything at all, it's about value. It's not about money. One of the things I learned from my mother's death a little bit more was it can't be to do with objects. It can't be to do with stuff. It can't be to do with your bank balance. It can't be to do with the furniture. Because when someone dies, nobody wants the furniture. Nobody wants the house. We've sold the house already. There's not anything in Henley and Elm that connects me with my mother now. It all disappears. Everything, as Mark said, everything solid melts into air. It can only be about value, and we all I get distracted from that, and I bet you get distracted, but it can only be about value. So we need to commit ourselves to Dharma practice, and that means committing ourselves to cultivating what I want to call a bounded self, yeah? Which sounds a bit odd because you can think that Buddhism is about a non-self. But firstly, we need to cultivate what I would call a bounded self. By a bounded self, I mean a self that's integral, that's unified, that's self-possessed, that is not full of weird conflictions and breaks and distractions. Yeah, we're so easily distractible, especially in our world of phones. We've never been so distractible, probably. We need to cultivate a bounded self. I put here, bounded but not fixed and not exclusive. What I mean by that, I think, is a focused self. A focused self that's focused on value. Yeah? That's the first thing we need to cultivate. Otherwise, we easily get confused. We easily get wrong-footed. We easily get distracted. And that's true. All of us know that's true. If you don't have a bounded self, it's very easy to be prone to fads and faddishness. And you see fads moving through our order and movement. People get into this and they get into that. And some of it's valuable, but some of it actually leaches away the strength of a sangha. You can sort of get hypnotized. It's very easy to get sort of seduced by the new teaching, or the new teacher even. You need an integral, bounded self that travels the path, that owns. We need to own ourselves and own our life and own our practice and travel the path that the Buddha set out for us. Yeah? We need a bounded self. We can't be thinking of non-self or anything like that before we have a bounded self, a healthy, integral self, so that we're not thrown off course by the slightest thing. Yeah? So we need a bounded self. And then that bounded self needs to practice a bounded teaching. Yeah? We need a bounded teaching. In other words, we need a system of practice. I've been interviewing people for Philosophy East, something that we've I've created out of poetry. And it's really fascinating. I've been talking to Rupert Sheldrake, the biologist. Soon I'm going to be talking to Gary Lackman about, he's had precognitive dreams for 40 years. I'm going to be talking to Helen Pluckrose about social justice. I'm going to be talking to all sorts of people about consciousness and so forth. And that's valuable. But if you're not careful, it's just more YouTube chatter, isn't it? It's everywhere. And I want to be inspired by all that and interested by all that. But I need an actual practice. I need what I commit to. I need an actual system of practice that's bounded. Do you see what I mean? That has quite a clear delineation. I need that, and I think you need that. You need an actual path of practice with symbolic milestones to tell you how you're moving on that way. I don't know whether Fred's here, but he's just been invited to be ordained, for instance, which is our great symbolic milestone. We need a path of practice that's integrated and unified and coherent, and that doesn't have contradictions within it. Yeah, and that's what Bhante Sangharakshara has given us. If we want to take it, you don't need to take that bounded practice, but you do need to take a bounded practice. If you don't want to take this one, great, leave now. There's lots of other Buddhist groups in London even. Take up one of their bounded practices, but don't hopscotch between one and another. It's very, very tempting now with the YouTube phenomena. You get a bit of non-duality, a bit of Advaita Vedanta, a bit of Christian mysticism, a bit of Sam Harris, a bit of, and it's all they're all new little shiny things. And it's very, very tempting now, like it never has been before. When I came along to this centre, before the steam age, most of the books that you could get were written by Bhante Sangharakshara. You didn't get anything else. No one ever talked about Bhante's vision. That's all there was, pretty much. But now you have to actually choose to a bounded practice. You need to be inspired and, open to everything, but you need a bounded practice. Otherwise you won't make progress. Otherwise it's like Maitreyabandhu being interested in the piano, being interested in jazz, being interested in Mala, which he's definitely not. Actually, he needs to focus on the sax, because that's what he plays, yeah? If you want to go anywhere with anything, you need a kind of narrowness. You need a kind of limitation. You need to commit to a particular system of practice. And never before has that been so difficult. Traditionally, you would never have even known about other systems of practices. It would have been a Buddhist wouldn't have known about Advaita Vedanta going on over there and Christian mysticism going on over here. No, you never heard such a thing. You would just be brought up in a community that practices a bounded practice. We modern westernized people are in the weird position where we have to choose one. And then you need a bounded Sangha. To have a bounded practice, by which I mean a system of practice, which includes meditation, ritual, and so on, that's coherent, that's self-coherent, that has stages of development written into it, both symbolically and literally, becoming a mitra, becoming ordained, moving from ordination to trying to gain insight into the nature of reality. All of those things are part of a bounded practice, a system of practice, and you need to do that with a coherent, unified community. You need a bounded Sangha. That's what we've got here. That's what we're trying to create here. We haven't got it here, really. We're trying to create it all the time. Every time we're together, we're trying to create a bounded Sangha. Not an embattled one, not a narrow one in the pejorative sense, but a bounded Sangha with a bounded Dharma consisting of bounded individuals who are self-possessed, take responsibility for their own life, make their own decisions, yes, in relationship to friends and so on, but it's your life, yeah? You need to have a certain kind of bounded integrity to do that. So we need a bounded self, a bounded Dharma, and a bounded Sangha, so that we are reborn together and we keep on working together over time to go for refuge to the Three Jewels and to gain enlightenment for the sake of all beings. And where I saw this, where I got this feeling from very strongly, again, was from sitting around the Bodhi tree. Because what you experienced there were all of these sanghas. There were supposed to be 15,000 Tibetan monks. I don't know whether there was that many, but there were certainly thousands and thousands of Tibetan monks all chanting together. It was very, very beautiful. They've got their own tradition, their own culture, that beautifully, incredibly developed culture, it felt to me. I was delighted to see them. At one time we were doing our puja and they were doing all these decorations for their puja, which was going to be tomorrow. And it was just a delight to see them. They moved, they were like all so kind of agile. They were so fast, getting all these incredible decorations on decorations. Really, really beautiful. And then you see, a Thai Sangha, all doing a completely different chant, different intonations, different language, but you could sometimes think, that's the same words as we're chanting. So what you had is all of these bounded Sanghas. So I felt part of an international Buddhist world, but I was part of a bounded Sangha. So that's all I needed to concentrate on, in a sense. I could be delighted to see all the others practicing, but my job was to help create this bounded Sangha. One of the striking things about our Sangha is it's so diverse. Nearly all the other Sanghas were effectively ethnic Sanghas. Tibetans, Koreans, Taiwanese, Japanese, and so on. Our Sangha isn't based in a place, yeah? Of course, so we need to have that bounded Sangha. We need a coherent practice, and we need a bounded Sangha, so that we can practice together for the now, for every moment, for the next moment that comes out of that moment, and for whatever happens beyond death. We need to somehow go forward. I mean, it seems mad, but we need to go forward together. We need to love each other enough, care for each other enough, care for the truth enough, to really motivate ourselves to create a bounded Sangha with a bounded Dharma for the benefit of all beings. That'll do.